I'd struggled with body dysmorphia and a general sense of inadequacy for as long as I could remember. And looking back at everything, it all made sense. I was a 5'2", 135-pound teenager until I was finally able to hit puberty about halfway through my sophomore year of high school. So a large part of my preteens and early adolescence was spent being the ass end of every joke, and usually was the one person people knew they could pick on. And even if I retaliated, I wasn't going to do a whole lot of damage. I mean, my nickname was Doughboy, for God's sake. So it made sense as to why I would go on to run the risk of completely wrecking my body, all in the name of strength, so I could be as strong as possible and as big as possible in order to fight some demon that no longer existed. All of these aspects of my younger self, such as never being good enough in class. Like if I had a B, it wasn't, hey, good job. It was, why didn't you get an A? If I did really well in sports, it wasn't, oh, great job. It was, but you could have did this thing better. Like I was never good enough for anybody. At least that's how I felt. And it really took its toll through my later years. And, all of these aspects of the things that I experienced being younger, from being bullied to never, all this inadequacy in my eyes, because that's the only thing that existed in my world, it ended up guiding a lot of my decisions. And it led me into a really narrow worldview where I believed everything would be hard and I would always be inadequate unless I did something super freaking huge, like just grand. I had to blow it out of the water no matter what it was that I did, which meant I could only focus on my problems that I was having and not enough on anything else that life had to offer. So I was always looking at problems rather than seeking solutions because I was running from something rather than running towards something. And I know a lot of you also struggle with these feelings of inadequacy, especially those of us who are super into our fitness, and that, like, regardless of what the outlet is, but a lot of us in fitness, like, we are so into our physique, how we look, how we perform, that we tend to attach so much of our identity to it. And it's what gives us hope. It's what gives us, life and a sense of who we are. But it's not like that doesn't come with a super harsh downside, like that I know many of you have experienced. And the problem is, like, when we're that deep into something, when we fail or we fall short of who we feel like we should be, we develop a negative view of ourselves unless we are always performing at the best that we possibly can, and anything less than isn't acceptable. And this is what I'm talking about is different than having high standards for yourself, because the difference between having high standards of yourself versus this feeling of inadequacy is that when you have high standards, you still understand that you may fall short from time to time, and that's okay. But these feelings of inadequacy come from a place of it is not okay to fail at all. And a lot of that just comes from our upbringing, maybe how we were raised by our parents, what our coaches said about us, what our friends say about us. And especially in fitness, this is where I developed body dysmorphia. Because not only was I getting bullied and everything, I was also friend zoned by every girl. And I thought if I looked hot, if I looked like a Greek god, or at least I was as strong as a Greek god, then people would accept me, women would accept me, etc., etc. But at some point, within the last 3 years, after, I had done a lot of work with myself, I went to therapy, talked to friends, journaled, etc., etc., I started to notice that I was becoming a better version of myself, and I was starting to not have those thoughts as frequently and not have those feelings of inadequacy as frequently. Still had them, not on the same level that I was before, though. And it got me thinking about it, and so I was trying to analyze, like, was there something that I had done, like, was there one particular thing that I had done at one point that, kind of had led me to this route to where I am now, which is a much healthier version, a much healthier sense of self for who I feel like I am. And at some point I came across this psychological theory known as self-complexity theory, and then it smacked me right in the nuts, and it made all of the sense in the world. Self-complexity theory delves into just this super cool world of how we perceive ourselves and how we experience ourselves. And it proposes that our self is not a singular thing, but rather it's a constellation of various aspects of us, like traits, roles, relationships, and experiences. And these elements all kind of weave together to form a multifaceted and ever evolving view of who we are relative to the world that we are experiencing. And it's super interesting because there's a few like things that, you can take away from this that if you really start to analyze, you can gain some valuable insight. So one, we have, different elements of ourselves. So this goes for psychological characteristics such as our personality traits, values, abilities, and, preferences that we have that contribute to our identity. We have social roles like just different things we wear in life, from student, employee, friend, family member. And every role has its own set of expectations and behaviors, and we normally act accordingly. Like a lot of times we don't act the same at work that we do when we're in private with our friends. And then we also have our relationships, like with loved ones, colleagues, acquaintances, etc. And they all play this super crucial role, and they layer together one on top of another. And when we look at the events and the experiences we have, like significant life events and, triumphs, challenges, everything, they leave a mark on our self-narrative. So the story that we tell ourselves about how we are and how we should be in the world. And this complexity matters for a few different reasons. One, like none of these elements of ourselves are static. It's not like we're the same thing every single day, every time to everybody. Everything is always constantly in an ebb and flow. And the more complex our self-structure is, the more diverse and interconnected are our traits and elements, the richer and more nuanced life tends to become. And we can start seeing things through a lot of different lenses. And so what this means for us is we can become more resilient, more self-compassionate, and then open to more and new experiences. And what I discovered was that when we attach ourselves so tightly to one particular identity, I was attaching myself as the weak kid who needed to be strong and jacked in order to overcome this trauma that I had experienced so I could feel worthy enough to do the things that I actually wanted to do. And what I discovered over these last 3 years is I started doing new things. So yes, I did fitness, but I also started to dive into, okay, well, how does business work? How does sales work? How can I be better in my relationship? How I want to try pickleball. I want to, go, camping in the middle of nowhere in Idaho. Like all these things started to, factor in, and all of a sudden I had this new sense of self where it's like, okay, well, even if this fitness thing doesn't work out and I'm not the most jacked guy in the room and I'm not the strongest guy in the world, like it's okay. Because I'm worth more than that and I have more value to offer to the world. And where a lot of this body dysmorphia and all this other stuff comes from, at least from my experience, was just I was attaching too much of myself to fitness. And I was attaching too much of myself to the ability that I could get laid, more or less. And so if you can start to do new things and attach your identity to multiple things in life that don't necessarily have anything to do with, your fitness or whatever the thing you're obsessed with is, the better your sense of self is going to be, because when one of those things fails, you have other things to fall back on. So if I say always call myself introverted, I can prove that to myself to not necessarily be true in certain circumstances, which is why I don't think it's like the best thing to necessarily self-label as I am introverted, I am anxious, I am extroverted, because you're putting yourself in this box to where if something disproves that, or something, you set yourself up for excuses, even though that's not necessarily the case, because we are different in many different situations and characteristics. So how, after, some analyzing of kind of everything I went through, how can we develop a more complex sense of self so that we don't attach ourselves so tightly to this one thing that we're obsessed with? And, the first step, at least for me, came down to self-reflection. So it's identifying the things that make you you. So like traits, your values, your skills, the roles you play in relationships, the roles you play in your family, what do people come and ask you? What do they come to you for, and where can you provide value to them? And then mapping those and connecting those to every other thing in your life. So let's say how does my fitness and everything I know about that, how does that play into my family dynamics? Well, I can teach my family how to be healthier so they can live longer, so that we can have a better relationship with one another. If we look at, what about my sales abilities, how I understand why people buy? I can use what I know about the psychology of influence to perhaps make somebody see my point of view, so they can at least have a better view of maybe a challenging situation they're in, which then can lead them to make a better decision and ultimately help their life get better. And then you can divide your life into chapters and look at, every little aspect. So I would look at, like, how was junior high for me? It was a little challenging, but not too bad, because not everybody had hit puberty and was like, had actually grown, where I was super far behind. High school for me was a little bit different, because I was, a lot smaller than most people, and I had to play catch up. Elementary was different because I was right on everybody's level. And so you can divide all these different aspects of your life and hopefully analyze, what parts were beneficial and what can I take away from those, and what value can I take away from those versus what can I leave behind, or what can I start to attempt to leave behind. And so the next step that I started doing was diversifying my experience. So this is where, whenever people say step out of your comfort zone, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to do something super drastic, but it's just try new things, go to new places. For me, it was, I moved to a new city. I, started wanting to do new things on the weekend that were a little bit out of my routine, such as just going on hikes, trying new coffee shops, trying new bars, getting around people that I'm not normally around, that might help me enjoy new things, or at least discover new things. And one of the things I discovered was, a real passion for like metal music. So I love going to shows. It's not a normal crowd that I'm always around, but I started to fall in love with that aspect of life. And so it was a new thing that I knew I could obsess about and just love for the sake of loving it, which ultimately led to me feeling better about, okay, even if this other thing doesn't work out, I still have other stuff that I love doing. And I think a lot of where we feel inadequate is because we feel like we don't have enough things going on, or don't have enough of an energy outlet into various things for whenever certain other things get stale and we stop enjoying it. Because in fitness, things will get stale. And when things get stale, we feel bad about ourselves. And when we feel bad about ourselves, we make terrible decisions. And whenever we make terrible decisions, we feel bad about ourselves again. And it's just a constant, never-ending cycle that continues to go on. And I even tried exploring some creative outlets. I painted shoes. I, distressed denim on my own. I started diving into Photoshop, video editing, just for the hell of it. And all these things made me realize, like, there is a lot more to life than just your fitness for me. And that made me realize I can be good at other things if this other thing doesn't work out, which gave me more confidence to be able to move forward and continue to do things that would potentially benefit me in the future, so I don't basically have all of my eggs in one basket. Then I became insanely self-aware, probably almost to a fault, to where it did cause more anxiety for a while. But you have to become self-aware, because if you become self-aware, you can be more self-compassionate and stop harshly judging yourself for everything that you are not. And then I started practicing gratitude, because it's just nice to be thankful for things. And whenever we're thankful for things, we tend to want less. And when you want less and desire less, you can allow life to flow more easily. And if you think about anybody that you know that tends to just kind of flow with life, they tend to be happier, and they tend to be more fulfilled, and they tend to just experience more things that a lot of us don't, because they understand that there is so much to be grateful for in life. And the last thing I did was just focusing on the now. And this is really difficult, especially if you're the type of person that's always in your own head. But if you can just experience things for what they are, I'm telling you, it's going to make such a big difference in how you see yourself, because you understand that every day is uniquely different and every situation is uniquely different and nothing is the same. Therefore, you do not take things for granted quite as often. And the last thing I did was I just built up a network of people that also maybe wanted to share certain experiences. So like I said, with metal shows, I have people that I can talk to that want to go to those things. I have people that I can talk to about stuff like this, because a lot of people, what you'll find is a lot of people are struggling with it. They just don't know how to talk about it, or they don't know anybody to talk about it with. Therefore, they don't feel safe just openly expressing it. But if you can be the person that comes out and just straight up tells people what you're struggling with and what you would like to do more of, more people are going to be open and receptive to those things. And it's also like super important to not only have those people, but have a consistent support group around it, so that they are consistently feeding you what you need as far as experience and conversations and super deep, talks about, how you feel about things and what you're experiencing. Because when we at least have an outlet, whether that's therapy or just friends, we tend to feel better. And a lot of times when you can vocalize your problems to somebody and somebody actually listens, you can solve your own problems. I talk to myself probably way more than I need to, and it's probably borderline psychotic, but just verbally vocalizing things helps me make sense of the world. And that's what a lot of this YouTube channel is. It's just me trying to vocalize how I feel about things. That way I can better provide value for others, as well as continue to grow myself. So, recapping, self-complexity is important if you consistently feel inadequate and like you are not enough. And most of that is probably because you have all of your life eggs in one basket, where you attach your identity to one thing. But if you can diversify your overall experience, you take less stock out of one. That way, if one just gets completely cut out, you have 4 more things you can do, as opposed to this one thing that now you have nothing in life, or you feel you have nothing in life. So with that being said, leave any comments if this helps. I'll have contact info in the description. Other than that, leave a comment. Let me know if this helped you. Thanks.